Welcome, everyone. My name is Terry Ross, and I'm the director of the Center for Corporate Sustainability at the Haskayne School of Business. And I'm really very excited to welcome you all to the first online Enbridge Research in Action seminar. The Enbridge Research in Action seminar convenes influential researchers, practitioners, and industry experts to discuss leading edge sustainability research and explore how to put that research into practical application. I want to thank Enbridge for their ongoing support of the seminar series and for their leadership in supporting innovation in our community. Now, this event is not only being held in cyberspace, but also on the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising of the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina First Nations, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bears Paw, and Wesley First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. Before we begin, a little bit of housekeeping. A quick review of a few features of our webinar platform. On your screen, you'll see on the left an agenda button where you can review the seminar topics. Below that, you'll see an evaluation button where after the event, you can provide feedback to help us improve the quality of the event. Below that, we have something called a COVID support link. And I wanted to promote this fantastic opportunity for small or medium Calgary businesses that are facing challenges, because Haskayne has partnered with Calgary Economic Development, the City of Calgary, the Calgary Chamber, Tourism Calgary, and the Business Council of Alberta to facilitate matching students to volunteer opportunities with small and medium enterprises who are facing business challenges. If you'd like to know more, you can click that link, or you can Google Haskayne COVID-19 to learn more. Now, as a result of the novel coronavirus, the global economy has been rattled to its core with a very hazardous path ahead. And Alberta's economy faces additional challenges with headwinds in the energy sector. Many leaders are concerned with the future of their markets and how to shepherd their organization through this very turbulent period. The famous free market economist Milton Friedman once famously said, "Only in a crisis, actual or perceived, will produce real change. And when that crisis occurs, the actions that are going to be taken depend upon the ideas that are lying around." So today's seminar will discuss ideas and strategies to develop critical innovation capabilities that will reveal a path to recovery. And if you're cunning, well-positioned, and lucky, they may even lead you to actions that drive profitable growth. Now, I'd like to introduce Oleks Osiewski. Oleks is an assistant professor of entrepreneurship and innovation at the Haskayne School of Business at the University of Calgary. He concentrates on the problem of achieving and sustaining firm growth through successfully engaging in entrepreneurial strategies. He focuses upon analyzing and designing innovative business models, improving the efficacy and effectiveness of corporate innovation policies, and evidence-based strategies for developing high-growth new ventures. I first met Alex in our PhD research methodology class, where he was definitely one of the most sharp students I'd had the pleasure of meeting when it came to understanding statistical methods of analysis and his research, and he was always extremely generous with sharing his knowledge. It is my pleasure to introduce you all to Dr. Oleks Osiewski.
Terry, thank you very much for this nice introduction. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our listeners and viewers. I am absolutely excited to be here. And I will probably start with a little disclaimer. You might notice my Ukrainian accent. It has been always with me and it will remain with me. But bear with me for the next, I promise in the next 15 minutes, you will start understanding me much better if right now not everything is clear. So let us begin. Let us begin. And our story, of course, our seminar or our webinar series is primarily directed to Canadian and to Alberta businesses. But our story does not begin in Alberta or in Canada. Our story has to begin in China. China, world's second largest economy, great economy having both low-tech and high-tech sectors, economy on the rise to become the global champion, and this growth was stalled in late January of 2020 with coronavirus. Why do we start with China? Well, it is not just because it was the first country to be hit by crisis, but also we have to start in China because China is 2 or 3 months ahead of us. And there are important lessons we can learn from China that allow us to predict how the recovery will look like in North America or in Europe. So, China. First and foremost, right now, if you look at any economic indicator in China, ports congestion, export, import, credit card transactions, manufacturing, jobs, and so on, all of them are on stable path to recovery. Perhaps one of the most comprehensive economic activity indicators about Chinese economy was developed by Financial Times. And as you see right now on the screen, comparing to the year of 2019, by February of 2020, the Chinese economy collapsed almost in half. But the positive part of this story is if we look at this chart, if we continue to look at this chart, according to Financial Times China Economic Activity Index, by this time when we are talking, the Chinese economy has recovered to 75, almost 80% of its, comparing to prior year, to the year before these pandemics. And my projection is that in 2 or 3 months, Chinese economy will get totally back to pre-COVID levels. Over the last couple of months, I have been spending lots of time looking at Chinese businesses, Chinese enterprises, large and small, Chinese governmental interventions in order to stimulate economic recovery. And I believe there are important lessons that we can learn in Alberta or in Canada from what we observe in China. First and foremost, recovery is inevitable. This crisis that we are all experiencing together right now, we are all tired of these lockdowns, but we must understand that this is not a major war that kills hundreds of millions of people. It is a crisis where every country has to support the global efforts to resolve this crisis. We are all in this together globally. And also this crisis triggered by pandemics is likely to go away quite fast. Recovery is inevitable. And I know that a lot of business people here are having negative mood, but ultimately there is a lot of source of optimism when we look at China, when we look at South Korea, and we look at how they are recovering. So recovery is inevitable. Second thing, of course, pace of recovery across different industries is going to be different. Of course, the hardest hit industries like airlines, it will take them, my estimation, at least 5 years in order to fully recover to pre-crisis levels. But there are lots of other industries that are already bouncing back in China right now, or there are even industries that were not hit that hard. For example, and of course, retail, hospitality, organization of trade shows, exhibitions, these industries are going to lag behind in recovery, but others are doing quite well. Third thing, foresight is possible. It is prudent to look at what's going on in China. It is prudent to look at what's going on in South Korea. And this gives us ideas about the new patterns of demand once the lockdown restrictions are eliminated. So, for example, I already know a couple of examples when Chinese restaurants in New York City that are under lockdown order, still under lockdown order, they are keeping track of what's going on in China, and this gives them ideas about how the restrictions will be eliminated and how the demand will bounce back, what kind of things can work and which do not work. And probably the most important insight that I see in Chinese enterprise recovery is the importance of grassroots innovation efforts. It is your frontline employees, it is your team that is constantly communicating with clients, observe the clients' problems, and it is your team that has ideas about how to stimulate innovative recovery. You cannot assume, it was never the case that top management team can be the only source of innovation. usually the amount of entrepreneurial energy is spread across your organization, and you must make sure that these grassroots innovation entrepreneurial ideas can be materialized. In crisis simply accelerated this or revealed this issue that you have to make sure that innovation happens at all levels of your organization. You cannot assume that CEO or top management team is the only source of innovative ideas. This is what successful Chinese companies are doing, particularly small and medium enterprises are doing in order to stimulate recovery. Now, if I have to attach a single label to this whole webinar that we are having right now, that label would be dare to innovate. It is the right time to innovate now. In stable times, customers are quite picky. If you're coming out with new innovative product or service, they want this product or service to be perfect once it gets to the shelves. In times of crisis, in times of economic recovery, the customers become forgiving. They give you a chance, they give you a benefit of doubt. They understand that you as entrepreneur are trying to do, that you're trying new things, and it does not always work. That's why, for example, if we look at flexibility in manufacturing, when manufacturing companies in China are trying to follow the demands, some examples like moving their diaper production lines, reorienting them towards producing medical masks. Of course, sometimes these masks will not meet the expectations that are required by healthcare authorities. And from time to time, we have scandals about that. But that's natural if you're trying to innovate. This is time to innovate. Moreover, in most cases, your innovative efforts, in stable times, they might be used against the manager. You tried something, if you're successful, that's great, but if you're not successful, it will be used against you. In times of crisis, people understand that you are trying and they will give you a benefit of doubt. Your customers will give you the benefit of doubt. Particularly interesting things are happening in Chinese retail. Even though as lockdown restrictions are eliminated, there is a chance that people will get back to your stores. But this is not necessarily the case. Some people will actually experience how convenient it is to use Amazon, Alibaba, or online delivery from other stores, and they might not get back to your stores anymore. In this case, right now is the right time to think about how to use your qualified sales team to become online ambassadors for your brands, for your products, instead of trying to get them back into physical stores as sales associates. One last thing that might particularly work during the time of crisis is you have to preserve your team as much as possible. You have to put all efforts to preserving your team, not to lose your employees. Because if you lose them now, when the economy bounces back, you will have hard getting them back. In these cases, if there is a way to share your labor with luckier industries or luckier companies, this might be a way to survive this particular adversity that will go away quite soon. So, for example, in my native country of Ukraine or in China, companies are collaborating with each other. Some companies need a lot of labor, for instance, in order to organize deliverables, delivery of their goods and goods to the customers. While other companies like restaurants don't need so much staff as they used to have before. Is there a way to share your team with other businesses to make sure that you preserve this team? So dare to innovate. That's the key idea right now. This is the time I will give you more examples later, but examples related to North America and to Europe. But most important, it is the right time to innovate. Terry.
Thank you, Alex. Before I go any further, I'd like to just remind the audience of something I overlooked in the introduction, and that is the Ask a Question button on the panel. So during the presentation and at the end, we're going to have Q&A. So please take the time to ask questions that you may have for Alex where we can expand on these topics. Now, Alex, I wanted to just review the key takeaways that I heard you say there. The first one was that the recovery is inevitable. Second one, recovery is going to look different industry by industry. It's going to unfold differently. We can also have foresight and we can predict how this thing is going to happen so we aren't going to be taken by surprise and we can project what's coming down. Grassroots, innovation within a company and organization matter a great deal. Like a yoga practitioner, flexibility matters. And it's important to explore new roles for your staff and explore ways to protect them, because they're going to be crucial when it comes time to recover from this situation. And now, of course, carpe innovation, time to seize innovation and make things happen. Is that basically it?
Well, absolutely. You actually summarized it much better than I did. So thank you. Correct.
Wonderful. Okay, so now we're going to share a poll for the audience that will pop up on your screen. And we're going to ask you, in general, is now the right time for your organization to boldly innovate? And the scale goes from 1, which is strongly agree, to 5, strongly disagree. And while we take a minute to explore that, I'm going to ask Olex a question about whether or not Alberta's economy, with its structure largely around the natural resource development and manufacturing to support that, whether the structure of Alberta's economy can really learn from an economy like China's, which is so structurally different. So can the lessons from China generalize to Alberta?
This is an excellent question. Thank you. Of course, our countries are different. Of course, Alberta is different from China as well, or Alberta within Canada as a province. But I believe the difference is not that much in our current resource focus, but rather in the way the decisions are made in our societies. Chinese society is centralized. Most of the decisions, or much more decisions, are made centrally, in the interest of society, but are made centrally. In Alberta, most of the decisions are decentralized and are left to individuals. In the United States, even further, the decision-making is even more decentralized. It basically also means that when you have to respond to immediate threat, of course, China was much more efficient. Strict lockdown, testing, personal protective equipment, and so on. It is much easier to implement in China than in Alberta, than for that matter in the United States. However, when we are talking about recovery, that's a different thing. Recovery has to be fueled by entrepreneurial energy. And entrepreneurial energy cannot be stimulated in the top-down manner. Entrepreneurial energy has to be released from the society. And that's why I am sure that our decentralized decision-making in Alberta is going to lead to much better entrepreneurial recovery and faster than what we observe in China. So let's actually take a look at the poll results. I see that half of our audience responded. Oh, Terry, do you see the poll results?
Yes. Yeah.
Excellent. So just wanted to make sure. So I see that half of our audience responded. Thank you very much. And I am happy to see that half of our audience is agreeing with the statement that in general, it is right time for your organizations to innovate. This is definitely my view. And well, we have to understand people, our audience came here for a reason, and probably you came here for some practical tools that how this can be done. But this is my view as well. Crisis is a blessing for us. Crisis is needed in order to change our economy, to change our business models, in order to change our universities. And this is the right time to do it. So if you allow me, let's proceed. After discussing lessons from China, let's think more about how the world might look after COVID-19. And I'm sure that you heard this phrase quite often in terms of this time is different. When we had this during dot-com bubble, we had this during 2008 financial crisis, but this time is indeed different. And COVID-19 accelerated the trends that have been ongoing for a while, trends that have been quite latent, that we didn't notice. It accelerated and revealed them quite clearly. And looking at those trends allows us to foresee, to predict how the future will look like. This time is different because the global trade is in danger. And it is not necessarily a bad thing. It is actually a good type of threat worldwide. The traditional manufacturing paradigm that we have been seeing in the last 20, 30 years have been based on the idea that the stuff is designed in North America and in Europe. Then this stuff the orders are placed in Southeast Asia in order to mass produce these goods, and then these goods are shipped overseas back to North America and to Europe. The time between when you in North America notice some changes in demand and get the new products on the shelves in order to respond to this demand, right now the lag time is 3 to 6 months. This paradigm right now is changing. First and foremost, of course, we have a lot of nationalistic and protectionistic sentiment in our societies in general. And in addition, there are good reasons why this paradigm of mass production of stuff somewhere in one part of the world and then shipping them overseas to other part of the world is not going to continue. And in one term, this can be summarized as Fourth Industrial Revolution. This is a term that has been going on for about 8 years now. Fourth Industrial Revolution means, or Industry 4.0, simply means that the converging IT technologies like artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, big data, Internet of Things, cloud computing, all of these technologies are accelerating at exponential pace and converging. When they are applied to manufacturing, they lead to a whole new approach to manufacturing. They make our manufacturing plants more flexible, more fast in terms of responding to market demand, more efficient and more reliable. But what is even more important is that all these technologies eliminate to a large extent the need of mass production, instead moving to mass customization, where every customer might get precisely what they want, not one particular thing that is produced in millions somewhere in Taiwan or in China, but instead every customer will get what they want and delivered to them. Mass customization. In addition, we can talk about the shift towards local production and local market orientation. Putting it straight, if you have a plant operated by robots, you really don't care about the price of manual labor in Alberta and how more expensive labor in Alberta is comparing to China. The Chinese competitive advantage in terms of cheap labor, first, it is not cheap anymore, it is getting more and more expensive as the country becomes more and more rich. But second thing is, you probably don't need so much manual labor anymore if your plant is operated by robots and is fully automated. I predict that in the near future, we will see major shift towards local production, which allows us to respond to market demand immediately, and simultaneously, which allows us to not to spend money and time for transporting the goods overseas. We already see these changes, for example, in fashion industry. A good example is Zara from Europe. Instead of traditionally, if your designer notices a change in the consumer demand and they have an idea about a new clothes that should be put on the shelves, it will take you up to 3 months in order to produce these new things in Southeast Asia and get them to the shelves in Europe. Zara can respond to these changes in demand over 5 days. Well, I believe that it is probably a little bit longer, but still we are talking about weeks rather than months. This gives Zara competitive advantage, the competitive advantage coming from local production. This trend will move beyond fashion and will move to other manufacturing sectors. There is no good reason why we cannot in Canada produce our own personal protective equipment. COVID accelerated this understanding, but ultimately there is no good reason why we cannot produce it ourselves. There is no good reason why we cannot assemble computers here or assemble cars here. So, punchline is the following. Post-COVID world order is going to be different, but it is actually going to be much better for Alberta and for Canada. Terry, what do you think?
That's excellent. Like, so a key takeaway there that we have for that. Let me see. Our global industries and our global structure of the economy is changing. And it's driven by the technology towards customization and localization of production and markets. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And these are trends that are going to only accelerate. Whether COVID is here or not, the world 5 or 10 years down the road will be different.
Okay. So we got another poll that we'd like to throw up for you about Industry 4.0, and it's the same kind of a format. And it goes, do you agree or disagree that in general, Alberta's economy is capable to orient itself to Industry 4.0, as in mass customization, local production, and orientation to local markets? Same scale. Number 1, strongly agree. 5, strongly disagree. And in the same format, I'd like you to take a question from the audience, Olex, which I'm going to slightly paraphrase, but wanted to know whether or not, do you have any feel for what the payback period would be as far as the upfront capital costs to build a modern factory in North America versus the higher per unit cost of a traditional factory overseas?
Well, definitely it is expensive, but we have enough capital and cost of borrowing right now is next to zero. So there is no good reason for putting capital requirements as an obstacle for changing our economy. Of course, we are talking here about medium term. Of course, in the short term, our companies have to survive this particular crisis. But thanks to governmental support, thanks to our overall Canadian societal attitude towards that we are in this together and we will go through this together, I'm sure that companies will survive. But you have to think about this post-COVID world. And in 5 years down the road, I do expect that we will have much more manufacturing facilities here.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Let's thank you very much for casting your poll, and let us look at the results. So 120 members responded, and I'm also quite happy to see that most of the people agree or are indifferent with respect to whether we are ready for Industry 4.0. And I definitely understand the reasons why 21% of people disagreed or strongly disagreed. There are lots of good reasons and obstacles for introducing Industry 4.0. But simultaneously, I can say that all of them we can overcome them. Alberta was able to reinvent itself a couple of times. Other jurisdictions were able to reinvent themselves. We will be able to do that.
Very good.
Let us actually proceed. So thank you very much for this poll. Let us proceed about what can a company do in order to adjust. So we have discussed that China is adjusting. We have discussed that the future is actually quite bright for manufacturing in Canada and in Alberta, and manufacturing will drive our economic growth in the medium term. But what can you do as a company? What can you do as a leader? And this is where I get to the point of innovator's dilemma, probably answering also the concerns about why we might not be ready for Industry 4.0. The thing is that most businesses are doing business as usual. They are working on their established niches with their established customers, and they are doing their existing and they are producing existing products and doing existing services. And there are good reasons for continuing business as usual. Business as usual made your company what it is right now. Business as usual made our economy great as it is right now. Most radical innovations, most crazy entrepreneurial things, let's just go to totally different country, or let's stop publishing our paper copy of the newspaper, let's go fully online. Most of these radical things do not work. Of course, great companies, the Facebook, Snapchats, Airbnbs of today, they emerged out of somebody's major innovative effort. Somebody tried a great new thing. But we should not forget that these are positive outliers. These are companies that got to right-hand side of the performance distribution. Absolute majority of other companies who tried crazy things, they failed. So continuing business as usual with incremental improvements, making sure that your product is getting a little bit better every year, making sure that your customers are getting more and more happier year after year. This is important. This is what prudent managers have to do. The problem is that in the long term, you have to adjust. In the long term, every company will have to change their core business, because society changes, competition changes, industries changes, and but breaking away from core business and core scenario and business as usual is very hard. And in most cases, it does not work. This is where COVID-19 brings us some hope. It actually does the job for us because it eliminates our business as usual. If your business as usual does not work anymore, you have to innovate. And in this case, your opportunity costs are going to be low because the main business is going down. A few years ago, together with my colleagues, I analyzed hundreds and hundreds of companies, trying to understand how can they renew themselves during economic adversity. And we published an academic paper, but this academic paper, when we developed it, it was it was way before COVID, but it was published right now, and it is very relevant to what we see right now. So what we see in crisis, entrepreneurial exploration, trying out radically new things, on average works. And simultaneously, of course, it accelerates, it creates risks as well. It might not work, but crisis is the right time to try new things. Because in crisis, trying to do what you have been always doing simply stops working, and it leads to reliable but crappy results. Let's say it like that. Well, maybe it is a little bit rude, but that's the way it is. Keep on doing business as usual will not work in crisis. This seems it seems quite intuitive. But the thing is that we have strong evidence that suggests that in crisis is the right time to try new things. Let's look at the universities. Of course, there is a major shift towards online education. Of course, 20 years down the road, online education will have major place in our universities. Maybe it will not fully replace face-to-face, but it will still occupy a huge market niche. But most universities have been conventionally concentrating on what they have been always doing, which is face-to-face education in lecture mode. If there is no crisis, a university would continue doing what it has been always doing because it is just natural, and also statistically it makes sense. However, crisis forces us to try new things. All universities 2 months back had to switch to online education overnight. We all had to try new things. Of course, most of the attempts failed, and we will get back to face-to-face education where we can. But some attempts actually worked. Some of the courses might continue to be online courses because it really worked out there. So basically, crisis unleashed entrepreneurial energy among professors, which is not that typical actually. The same thing will happen everywhere. So if you have been, I know a company that is, its core business is producing fresh produce. I cannot discuss further, but producing fresh produce for the restaurants. These days, restaurants don't buy stuff anymore as they used to be. So the company right now is seeking about how to get access, how to get this produce to end users, to consumers. It is the crisis that stimulated this type of thinking. In business as usual, we didn't need to do that. Terry.
Thank you, Alex. And so for me, the key takeaway from this is that while existing business models can be improved and maybe made more effective, this crisis is sort of driving an opportunity for a qualitative change in the business models of companies that could potentially be even more lucrative down the road. Is that right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I would even say crisis gives us good reason to break away from the core business, not just to adjust it, but to break away from it, to adjust to the future that is coming.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Now, if we go back to even more detailed things, what can you do? What as a manager can you do right now? What as an entrepreneur can you do and should you do right now? And my first answer here is the following. Rigorous planning at this stage, rigorous long-term planning will simply not work. You have to embrace the effectuation mindset. Effectuation is a buzzword, another buzzword that I'm emphasizing today, but it is very important buzzword. Effectuation is how experienced entrepreneurs are making their decisions. And experienced entrepreneurs, they understand that you need planning. Of course, you need to, in order to invest $1 million, you have to understand how you're going to spend it. But also, it is very, very important to look at what you have. Look at what assets, capabilities, look at your team, and think about where else can you utilize these assets better than they are utilized right now. If you are a hotel owner and right now you don't have any guests, what else can you do with your facilities? If you are a university and face-to-face education does not work anymore, at least for now, how can you best utilize your stellar professors, outstanding research, great students, how to utilize it? Start with what you have and think about what to do with it. Second thing, experimentation and flexibility. In crisis, you have to experiment. You have to treat new innovative projects as experiment that most of them will not work, but some will and lead to miracles. As with online education, some of our online courses happen to be great, and they will become world-recognized online courses. However, of course, entrepreneurship has to be disciplined. This is where I need to talk about affordable loss principle. Affordable loss principle basically means don't bet the farm in order to try a new idea. Every project has to be tested, keeping in mind that it might fail. And it is okay, and make sure that your team understands it. They have to learn and they have to adjust. On the slide, I put the guys who are trying out the new airplane 120 years ago or 110 years ago. So they are using effectuation principles. First, they start with what they have. They don't have jet engines. Instead, they are using the technologies that they have and the knowledge that they have. Second, experimentation and flexibility in building those prototypes. But the most important is affordable loss principle. They are not flying this prototype at 1 kilometer, at the height of 1 kilometer, because most likely it will fail. Instead, they are flying at 1 meter above the ground just in order to see whether it works. This is the seed investment. Later on, if it works, you can always scale it up. Finally, sometimes people say that innovation requires major investments. This is not always the case. By having partnerships with other stakeholders, with the government, with your customers, you can actually start major innovative projects with minimal investments. And this is what effectuation mindset is all about. Our webinar is a webinar in a series of Enbridge Research in Action. So this is where academics have to share evidence-based advice with business community and with each other. And this is my part. I would like to show that these discussions about effectuation is not just bold and justified claims to make us all happy. I have empirical evidence, and in a recently published academic paper with my colleagues, that shows that in times of crisis, rigorous planning does not work. It leads to marginal performance improvements and simultaneously boosts their risks. On the other hand, if you embrace effectuation principles, flexibility, experimentation, and affordable loss, you actually can renew your company in times of crisis with minimal risks. I would even say that effectuation principles, rather than rigorous planning, buffers your company from all the uncertainty and turbulence that is going on in external environment. So my key takeaway from here is that you have to be flexible in order to adjust to the new reality that will happen after COVID. You have to be flexible. You have to think about what you actually have, where you are the best in the world, and then you have to use it in order to experiment and find your way out.
That's interesting, Alex. Some of the key takeaways, again, coming to this rigorous planning topic that you brought up, it reminds me of a quote that's, I think Mike Tyson said, where he says, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And so the key takeaway I'm taking for this was twofold. One is that there's a series of behaviors, the effectuation mindset behaviors, that improve the performance of an organization in uncertain times. That's the first one. And then the second one about the affordable loss principle. And there's a quote that Jim DeWald brought up at one point. It said, don't waste a crisis, but don't let the crisis waste you. So, how do you also know how much to spend on these uncertain but potentially high upside endeavors is an interesting takeaway.
Absolutely, absolutely. And of course, we also have to understand there are some projects where you need major commitment up front. So you cannot build a small nuclear reactor and then expect that large nuclear reactor will work. Or you cannot build a pipeline without planning. But in most other cases, it is all about experimentation and flexibility and trying lots of new things. And this is something that in stable times we don't think too much about. Our business leaders became business leaders because they were doing business as usual. One of the easiest ways to destroy a career of a young manager is to start a spin-off company that needs to disrupt the whole industry, as some business gurus suggest. Well, most CEOs became CEOs because they were growing up in the ranks of doing business as usual. Crisis gives us good reasons to try new things, and that's actually a blessing. Even though, of course, it hits hard. So it took me 2 months in order to fully recover mentally from what's going on here. Which brings us to the discussion of leadership in times of crisis. A few years back, together with the Dean of Haskayne School of Business, Jim Duwalt, we looked at almost 1,000 of different companies across different industries. And we asked a simple question. How does it happen that in times of crisis, some companies are innovating, are trying new things to renew themselves, while other companies, actually most of the companies, just stick to what they have been always doing: traditional products, traditional customers, traditional business models. So we try to understand when necessity is the mother of invention or when necessity is the mother of rigidity. And this is what we found out. There is a common pattern across these cases. Common pattern that is very statistically significant. This common pattern says that if you want to unleash the entrepreneurial energy of your team, you have to have 3 components. As a leader, you have to tell stories in order to create 3 frames in the minds of your employees. First and foremost, there is a need for a threat, or there is a need of a crisis. If people feel that everything is fine, the times are good, it's really hard to force yourself to try new things. Why to take risks is if everything is okay. As a leader, you have to show that, no, everything is not okay. Here, luckily, COVID-19 did it for you. Now everyone understands that future is going to change, and what was before, we are not going to return to it. But perception of crisis or perception of threat itself is not enough. Your team also has to feel that they have sufficient time to innovate. This is what, for example, we didn't have this luxury in universities. We had to switch to online education overnight. And because of that, we could not expect that all the professors will really think deeply about how to radically innovate their courses to have perfect online delivery. Now, luckily, we have more time to prepare for fall semester, and in fall, if we do online education, I'm sure that quality of our courses will be much greater. Third thing, predictability. Your team has to see a vision for the future. They have to see how exactly the situation will evolve. Otherwise, we have psychological tendency to engage in this analysis paralysis. Let's analyze, let's think, let's see how the situation evolves instead of acting. You have to, as a leader, project the feeling of predictability. It is like in an army, a military commander has to project the confidence and vision that he or she knows what's going on, even though reasonable person always has doubts and second thoughts about what they are doing. So leadership is very important. In order to unleash these grassroots innovations that we discussed are so important today, you have to, as a leader, create a sense of crisis, which is already done for you, show that people have sufficient time to think about what to do, otherwise they will keep on doing what they have been always doing, and create a vision for the future. And of course, this all will never materialize into an innovation if your team is not feeling secured. Over to you, Terry, for the last poll.
Great. Thank you, Alex. So a key takeaway, though, is that for this one, it's really, again, we make it sound like we're saying the same thing over and over again, but I think it bears repeating. We don't want to let a good crisis go to waste. And that if you're a leader, look to your employees to spur ideas for innovations and use your leadership to provide time, space, security, and a narrative for their innovation journey. Does that sound about right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Leadership is particularly crucial now.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's get our last poll of the seminar up. And they asked the question, agree or disagree, that as a result of this crisis, your organization's leadership is exploring adjustments to their business model. Okay?
Excellent.
Now, let me ask you a question from the audience while this is being filled out, Olex. So if you're giving a recommendation to an entrepreneur who is in the airline or restaurant industry, or how could they apply your ideas? And is government support the only way to keep these afloat? And is that going to be good for the long-term health of the Alberta economy?
So there are two questions ultimately here. Let me answer the second part first. I am not a big proponent of government giving money to the economy in order to support something. In most cases, entrepreneurs have to act themselves. Yet, this is the rare case where we need to make sure that we preserve our companies. Because if an entrepreneur, small business owner, loses his or her team right now, it will take lots of time to get them back later on. And in this case, if the government can help with paying part of payroll, this is the reasonable thing to do to prepare us for the fast bounce back that will happen. Now going back to airline industry. Of course, this industry is hit hardest. But airline industry has a lot of specialized assets and particularly specialized employees. If they lose these assets and employees, it will be impossible to bounce back. It takes years to prepare a qualified pilot. And basically, these pilots right now have not too much else to do because all airlines are not flying that much. We need to make sure that the teams are preserved. And this is where the government's role might be justified and actually should be. This is where it is justified. So government has to help to survive through this short period of adversity for all companies and a little bit longer for airlines or some other affected industries. In the long term, this will pay off enormously because it will accelerate recovery. But what to do with particular airlines right now? You have to find alternative business models. And I am not a specialist in airlines about how to do that precisely, but this is the only way out. Excellent, thank you. So for this question, let's look at the poll results. So the question was about, is your company doing, or can you please reformulate the question? I want to be precise here.
Absolutely. So it was around, as a result of this crisis, is your organization's leadership exploring adjustments to their business model?
And excellent. And I am absolutely happy to see the results on the screen. So, of course, we are all forced to make adjustments to what we are doing. And I am happy that Alberta or Canadian or worldwide entrepreneurs are thinking about these adjustments. That's the blessing of the crisis, even though that's the blessing of the COVID, even though, of course, it takes a lot of efforts and time from all of us. All right. Now, let me summarize what we have been just discussing, particularly for Alberta economy. First and foremost, expect a fast recovery from epidemics. This whole thing will not be forever. And second, there is a lot of demand that right now is postponed that will get immediately back once the lockdown and restrictions are eliminated. Expect a fast recovery. There is no good reason why we will not observe it. Second thing, you have to survive the short term. You have to preserve your assets and your employees, your teams in the short term. And I think that right now the government's help is totally justified. Third thing, in the medium term, bet on local manufacturing. I am sure that Industry 4.0 will change the global world order so that it will be hard to recognize it even 10 years down the road. I already see a lot of great companies with manufacturing potential emerging here in Alberta, going through our creative destruction lab at University of Calgary. Medical devices, artificial intelligence, different energy equipment, all of these things can and should be produced locally for economic reasons, for good economic reasons. And finally, at the end of the day, the oil price will not matter. And let me put it straight. I am a proponent of oil and gas industry in Alberta, and I really hope the oil price recovers and our recovery will be powered by oil and gas production. But it doesn't depend on us. It depends on the world oil market, and there is a chance that it will not bounce back, or at least it will not bounce back in the observable future. And this is the key point I'm trying to make. Alberta is a great place to live. It is a great place to do business, not because oil and gas company. It is not because of oil and gas. It is not oil and gas that made Alberta a great place in the first place. It is the entrepreneurial spirit of Albertans. It is the entrepreneurial spirit of newcomers here and entrepreneurial spirit of people who have been here. It is this entrepreneurial spirit that was funneled towards oil and gas industry. But if oil and gas industry does not fully recover, we will be able to use this entrepreneurial spirit, energy, and local capital in order to diversify Alberta economy. Importantly, this diversification should not be governed by the government, for example. It has to be governed by entrepreneurs making decisions about their particular companies in their particular circumstances. We have educated people, we have local and loyal capital, we have great society that supports each other. Oil price will not matter, even though I personally would like it to move up. Over to you, Terry.
Thank you, Olex. So we're a little bit behind schedule, so I'm going to go right to the Q&A, answer a few questions if we have some time, and then we'll pass it over to Dean Jim DeWald for the close. So our first question is about strategic advantage of Alberta and why it has, or why should it have an advantage over jurisdictions like BC, Ontario, or other locations in the US when it comes to becoming a manufacturing hub?
Well, here's the thing. We don't have major disadvantages either, except for access to ports, but this can be resolved. But when I look at other great states or territories or provinces or countries, the countries that were able to reinvent themselves, or the state of Massachusetts, it has been continuously reinventing itself over the last 300 years. And they had two things there. First, educated population. Second thing, local capital. As long as you have educated population and local capital, there are ways to reinvent economy. Now, also from economics thinking, we have to understand we don't have to be best in the world in something in order to find our place in the global economy. We don't have to have more than BC has or more than Ontario has. We have people, we have money, we have entrepreneurial spirit. It will find its way out.
Excellent. And that's actually a great segue to our next question, Olex, about the entrepreneurial mindset. And it's a question that states, what's been reviewed regarding the psychological receptivity to innovation given the crisis? So people are already forced out of their comfort zones. Are there studies that say that this avails them to accepting even more change?
Absolutely. However, not always. So crisis in itself, moving you out of comfort zone in itself does not guarantee that you will become more innovative. So our study shows that we have statistically significant pattern that shows that feeling of crisis coupled with enough time to think about what to do and coupled with perception of predictability of situation, you have a feeling that you know how it unfolds. The combination of these three things usually stimulates innovative thinking. But out of all of this, the most important is the feeling of crisis. Of course, it does not always happen. It is more a statistical generalization, but it is quite a strong statistical generalization. And considering the population of Alberta, even if 10% of our population becomes more innovative, this is enough in order to stimulate entrepreneurial recovery.
Excellent, thank you. So this next question reminds me of a long time ago when I worked in innovation policy, and there was some slightly cheeky statements that said, you know, a lot of people felt like in the industry that when oil prices were high, they didn't feel a need to innovate. And when oil prices were low, they couldn't afford to innovate. And that kind of leads to this question here, which suggests that if there was a fast recovery, won't oil prices recover strongly, and won't that inhibit entrepreneurial diversification?
Wow. Well, first and foremost, I understand that if everything is fine, you don't have incentives to innovate. I totally get it, but I cannot agree that when everything is not fine, when oil price is down, we cannot afford to innovate. This is just not true. Most innovations do not require major capital. Or if your idea is good enough, you will be able to raise capital regardless of the state of the economy. Of course, as entrepreneurship professor, I meet quite a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs who say, well, I have this great idea, but nobody wants to finance it. Well, in most cases, that there is something wrong with your idea. Investors are not here to kill great ideas. Investors are here to make money. And if they see that you have a good idea, there is first, you don't need too much money. And second thing, there are ways to raise the seed money that you need. Now going back to oil price, of course, if oil price goes up and goes up fast, the emphasis of our economy will go again to oil and gas sector. But there is nothing wrong about it. Ultimately, we still have universities, we still have all this innovation infrastructure that would allow to get some of this wealth going to other areas. So I'm not concerned about that. It that much. I'm usually much more concerned if the oil price is high. We have few incentives to innovate, let's say it like that.
Yeah, excellent. Now there's a lot of other outstanding questions, but unfortunately we're at the end of our Q&A time. So I want to thank you, Alex, and I will pass control over to Dr. Jim DeWall, Dean of the Haskayne School of Business, to conclude this seminar. Over to you, Jim.
Thanks so much, Terry, and I really appreciate the discussion here. I'm pretty sure that Alex has only started the discussion. He didn't really finish it off, but I want to take this opportunity to thank Alex for his evidence-based insights on business leaders managing in a post-COVID recovery. I also want to thank Enbridge for their ongoing support of this seminar series and their leadership and support, mostly through innovation in the community. We have a spectacular relationship with Enbridge and really appreciate that. I want to thank the support of Educational Measures, which is our engagement platform, which I think has added a real touch of professionalism to what we're doing here in this new world. And I want to tell you that our next Enbridge Research and Action Seminar will be held in the fall. So stay tuned for more information on that. Now you will see an evaluation tab on the left side of your screen to provide feedback for today's program. This is really important because we're trying new things and we want to grow this platform. So your feedback will help us a great deal. And the final thanks really has to go to all of you who have participated in this. We're just so thrilled to be able to reach out to people in this way and share some of the work that we're doing. And I hope you found it valuable, and let's keep the dialogue going. This was only the start. So thank you so much for coming on this webinar and for being part of our Enbridge Research and Action series. That concludes our event, and thank you so much. All the best. Have a great day.
Thank you.